Imagine a world where nothing is fixed, where truth is fluid, and reality itself is up for debate. That's what postmodernism challenges us to think about. Did you know that 60% of social media users can't tell the difference between fake news and real news? Or that some political leaders now control more truth than the media itself? These aren't just stats, they're a sign of how postmodernism is shaping our world today. In this video, we're diving deep into the power of postmodernism, from how it's shaking up politics to redefining the way we see truth, authority, and even democracy. It's a theory that's influenced everything from your social media feed to global movements like Black Lives Matter. But how does it really affect the world we live in? And what does it mean for the future of politics? Get ready to see the world in a whole new way as we explore how postmodern ideas are changing the game, one political crisis at a time. Stick around, you won't look at politics, or reality, the same way again. Chapter 1. Unpacking the Puzzle. What actually is postmodernism? Postmodernism can feel like a confusing, almost elusive concept. At its core, it's a way of thinking that challenges traditional beliefs and ideas about truth, knowledge, and power. Born in the mid-20th century, postmodernism rejects the idea that there is one universal truth. Instead, it emphasizes that truth is subjective, shaped by culture, language, and individual experience. One key figure in postmodern thought is French philosopher Jean-François Lyotard. He famously said, simplifying to the extreme, I define postmodern as incredulity toward metanarratives. In other words, postmodernists are skeptical of big, all-encompassing stories or ideologies that claim to explain everything. Think of it like this: there's no single way to view the world, and no single truth that everyone must accept. Postmodernism also pushes back against the idea of absolute progress. In the modern world, we often think of society evolving towards something better, like technological advancement or improved human rights. Postmodern thinkers argue that this idea of progress is just another narrative. They say it's not always true, and sometimes, progress can even have negative consequences. Instead of grand, sweeping narratives, postmodernism focuses on local, personal, and diverse experiences. It celebrates ambiguity and complexity. This doesn't mean postmodernism is anti-knowledge, it just means that it recognizes that all knowledge is influenced by context and perspective. So, postmodernism questions everything, including our beliefs about politics, history, and social structures. Politically, postmodernism raises questions about the nature of authority and power. It critiques systems that claim to know what is best for everyone. It's about breaking down hierarchies and challenging how those in power define what's considered true or right. Postmodernism tells us to consider the voices of the marginalized, questioning who gets to make the rules and why. In practice, postmodernism is more than just theory, it has had real-world effects. In politics, it's led to movements that reject traditional systems, favoring a more fluid, decentralized approach. As we move further into a digital age, postmodern ideas influence how we consume information, challenge political elites, and see the world. This is why it's so important to understand its foundations. Chapter 2. From Concrete to Fragmented, The Rise of Postmodern Politics. As postmodernism made its way from philosophy into politics, it began to shift the way people viewed governance. In the past, politics was often seen as a battle between clearly defined ideologies, like left versus right, conservative versus liberal. But postmodernism introduced a new approach: fragmentation. Instead of seeing politics as a unified whole, postmodernism focuses on the diversity of experiences within society. It suggests that people aren't just part of a single, cohesive group, but exist in multiple, overlapping identities. This challenges the old political categories and opens up a more fluid way of thinking about political struggles. One example of this is identity politics. Political movements today are often centered around specific identities like race, gender, or sexuality. Rather than focusing on one-size-fits-all solutions, postmodernism calls for policies that reflect the uniqueness of individuals' lived experiences. This shift is evident in the rise of movements like Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ+ rights, and feminism. In the world of postmodern politics, consensus is rare. There's no longer an assumption that everyone should agree on one particular political vision. Instead, political debates have become more fragmented. Issues like climate change, economic inequality, and healthcare are now discussed from many different perspectives, each highlighting unique aspects of the problem. Postmodernism also encourages skepticism toward large, institutional powers. Political elites are often seen as detached from the realities of ordinary life. Postmodern thinkers argue that centralized power is inherently problematic because it tends to suppress diversity and impose a narrow, biased worldview. In a way, postmodernism advocates for decentralization, where power is more evenly distributed. Interestingly, political leaders and parties are increasingly aware of the need to engage with these fragmented viewpoints. They have adapted their strategies to reflect the diverse interests of various groups. For example, US politicians have increasingly turned to social media as a tool to connect with voters directly, bypassing traditional gatekeepers like the media. This creates a more fragmented, personalized political landscape. But fragmentation isn't always seen as positive. Some critics argue that it leads to polarization. They fear that postmodernism's rejection of universal truths may cause divisions so deep that it's impossible to find common ground. Still, postmodern politics has created new opportunities for expression, amplifying voices that were previously marginalized. Chapter 3: Power, Truth, and the Postmodern Political Elite. Postmodernism doesn't just challenge traditional political ideologies, it also forces us to reconsider who holds power and how truth is constructed. For postmodern thinkers, power and truth are deeply intertwined. This connection is explored in books like Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish, where he argues that power isn't just about control, it's about defining what's true. One of the most intriguing postmodern ideas is that truth is not universal or objective. Instead, it's shaped by the people in power. This has huge implications for politics. It suggests that political leaders, through their control of information, can shape what the public believes to be true. For example, the rise of fake news and media manipulation highlights how truth can be malleable in the hands of powerful elites. In the postmodern world, media is often seen as the primary tool used to maintain power. Whether through traditional newspapers, television, or social media, those who control the narrative have a significant influence over public opinion. A study by the Pew Research Center found that 68% of US adults get their news from social media. This shift means that truth is no longer determined just by journalists or politicians, it's shaped by algorithms and platforms that prioritize engagement over accuracy. Postmodernism calls attention to this dynamic, pushing us to ask, who benefits from the dominant narratives? For example, consider how political campaigns are increasingly tailored to specific groups using big data. By targeting voters with customized messages, politicians create a version of truth that resonates with specific audiences, but may not reflect broader reality. At the same time, postmodernism urges us to recognize the role of marginalized voices. It's about questioning who gets to speak and who gets to define what's considered true. Activist movements, for instance, often expose the hidden truths of power, stories that are ignored or silenced by mainstream politics. By challenging the dominant narrative, they push for a more inclusive political landscape. The rise of populism in recent years illustrates how postmodernism's critique of power and truth has affected political movements. Leaders like Donald Trump and Jair Bolsonaro have exploited the breakdown of traditional media channels to create their own truths. They present themselves as outsiders, rejecting established norms and framing the mainstream media as the enemy. However, this approach also highlights a major issue with postmodernism: if truth is entirely subjective, can we ever agree on anything? When everyone has their own version of reality, it becomes much harder to form a shared political vision. This challenge remains one of the most debated aspects of postmodern political theory. Despite these challenges, postmodernism has undeniably reshaped the political landscape. It has led to a more fragmented, decentralized form of politics, where truth is seen as something constantly in flux, shaped by power, media, and the voices of the people. The question now is, how do we navigate a world where there is no single, universally accepted truth? If you're enjoying this deep dive, make sure to hit the subscribe button and join the conversation about how postmodernism is reshaping politics. Chapter 4: Deconstructing Democracy. Is postmodernism the end of political norms? When you think about democracy, you probably picture elections, representatives, and a system where everyone gets a say. But postmodernism challenges this traditional view. Postmodern thinkers like Jacques Derrida argue that concepts like democracy are not fixed, but are constantly deconstructed and reshaped by the people and the power structures around them. This raises a serious question: can postmodernism work within traditional political norms, or does it signal their end? In postmodern thought, there is skepticism about the idea of universal democracy. Postmodernism argues that democracy is often shaped by those in power, and that it can be used to mask inequalities. For example, while democracy may give citizens the right to vote, it doesn't necessarily ensure that all voices are heard equally. Wealthy elites, corporations, and media outlets often shape the political landscape, making it harder for marginalized groups to influence change. This idea is particularly evident in the rise of populist movements. Leaders who reject traditional political elites often argue that democracy has become corrupt and needs to be reclaimed by the people. However, postmodernism suggests that even these movements might be influenced by larger, uncontrollable forces. In fact, populist leaders frequently use media platforms to construct their own narratives of democracy, which postmodernism sees as just another form of power play. Postmodern democracy is also much more skeptical about truth and facts in politics. It raises doubts about the reliability of information used to make political decisions. With the explosion of fake news, misinformation, and alternative facts, postmodernism asks whether we can truly trust any system or claim to be objective. In a world where truth is fluid, can democratic decisions still be made based on objective facts? At the same time, postmodernism doesn't offer a clear alternative to traditional democracy. Instead, it emphasizes a more decentralized, participatory form of politics, one where individuals don't just vote once every few years, but are actively involved in shaping political decisions. This could mean rethinking institutions like political parties or even reconsidering who gets to hold power in the first place. Some postmodern theorists also argue that democracy should be more focused on dialogue than consensus. Instead of forcing everyone into a singular viewpoint, postmodern democracy encourages diverse perspectives and debates. This approach challenges the traditional notion of democracy as a majority rule system, suggesting that true democracy is about recognizing and validating different voices. While this decentralized form of democracy may seem idealistic, it aligns with the broader trend of rejecting central authority and embracing individual autonomy. In some countries, this has led to movements that push for more grassroots involvement and less reliance on top-down decision-making. Yet, these movements often struggle to maintain unity, as postmodernism doesn't provide easy solutions or a roadmap for organizing political action. The challenge, then, is finding a balance between rejecting established norms and still being able to govern effectively. Postmodernism asks whether democracy can evolve to meet the needs of an increasingly diverse and fragmented world, or whether it's doomed to fragment even further. For now, these questions remain open, and the answer may depend on how societies choose to engage with postmodern ideas moving forward. Chapter 5: Hyperreality in Politics. Are we living in a simulation? You've probably heard of hyperreality, the idea that the lines between reality and illusion are increasingly blurred. This concept, coined by French theorist Jean Baudrillard, is incredibly relevant in today's politics. In a world dominated by social media, 24/7 news cycles, and constant images of political figures, hyperreality has become a central feature of modern politics. The question is, how does this affect how we view our political reality? In Baudrillard's view, hyperreality isn't just about fake news or deep fakes. It's about how reality itself has become mediated through images, symbols, and narratives. Political leaders, for example, are no longer just politicians, they're brands, carefully crafted personas that exist more in the media than in the real world. Think of how politicians like Barack Obama and Donald Trump used social media to construct their political identities. These identities are often more about spectacle than substance. One striking example is how politicians use social media to create a hyperreal version of themselves. For instance, during the 2016 US presidential campaign, Trump famously tweeted directly to his followers, bypassing traditional media. These tweets, full of bold statements and often controversial ideas, helped to create a persona that resonated with his supporters. In Baudrillard's terms, this was a hyperreal political performance, more about maintaining an image than about engaging in deep, meaningful dialogue. The idea of hyperreality also impacts how we understand political events. For instance, when protests, riots, or political conflicts occur, they are often filtered through the lens of media. The version of reality we see is shaped by how news outlets choose to cover these events, and how politicians spin them for their benefit. As a result, what we see on TV or online might bear little resemblance to what's actually happening on the ground. Hyperreality also plays a big role in the growing divide between real politics and virtual politics. As more people get their news and engage in politics online, the traditional forms of political participation, like voting, attending rallies, or writing letters to representatives, are increasingly replaced by online commentary, memes, and viral campaigns. In this environment, the lines between real action and symbolic protest often become blurred. A significant impact of hyperreality is the manipulation of public perception. Political leaders and parties now have the ability to create alternative versions of reality through social media and other platforms. Research has shown that fake news spreads more quickly than real news on Twitter. This means that voters might form their opinions based on distorted versions of events, which can have major consequences at the ballot box. Yet, not all is lost in this hyperreal world. Postmodernism encourages us to question the narratives we are given and to look beyond the surface. In a world where media shapes much of our perception, postmodern thinkers suggest that we must become more critical of the images and stories we consume. This critical perspective could be the key to navigating a world where truth and illusion are constantly interwoven. In the political world, hyperreality creates opportunities and challenges. It allows leaders to construct a narrative that can influence public opinion, but it also means that voters are more vulnerable to manipulation. The question remains, can we ever fully escape the world of hyperreality, or is this the new norm for politics in the digital age? Chapter 6: Postmodernism in Action, Political Movements and Their Cultural Revolution. Postmodernism isn't just an abstract theory, it's had a tangible impact on political movements worldwide. The emphasis on questioning authority, deconstructing power, and embracing diversity has led to a cultural revolution in how politics are conducted and understood. From social justice movements to global activism, postmodern ideas have reshaped how we think about political change. One of the most significant political movements influenced by postmodernism is the rise of identity politics. Postmodern thinkers argue that traditional political categories, like class, race, or gender, are constructed by society, and therefore, they can be redefined. This has led to a greater emphasis on the rights and voices of marginalized groups. For instance, the Black Lives Matter movement is directly connected to postmodern ideas about power, race, and identity. Another powerful example of postmodernism in action is the #MeToo movement. This movement highlights how postmodernism's focus on deconstructing power structures has been used to challenge the status quo. Women and marginalized individuals have taken to social media to share their stories of harassment and abuse, forcing a re-examination of societal norms and expectations. The movement's success shows how postmodernism's focus on individual experience can create meaningful political change. Global movements have also been impacted by postmodernism's emphasis on decentralization. From climate change protests to youth-led political campaigns, postmodernism's influence can be seen in the rise of leaderless movements that rely on grassroots organizing. The Fridays for Future movement, spearheaded by Greta Thunberg, is a prime example of this. It's not a top-down organization, but rather a decentralized network of activists demanding action on climate change. Postmodernism's influence is also visible in the growing use of digital platforms for political mobilization. Activists today use social media to organize, spread messages, and raise awareness about political issues. This shift is significant because it allows political movements to reach global audiences in a way that was never possible before. Platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram have become essential tools for creating and sustaining political movements. However, the very same tools that allow for global political action also present challenges. The spread of misinformation, echo chambers, and viral fake news mean that political movements must constantly battle against the manipulation of public opinion. Postmodernism encourages activists to be aware of these dynamics and to critically engage with the media and narratives they encounter. Despite these challenges, postmodernism has proven to be a powerful force in shaping political movements. It has given rise to a more diverse, fluid, and decentralized political landscape, where multiple voices can be heard and where traditional hierarchies are continually questioned. As we move forward, postmodernism will continue to influence how we understand politics, identity, and power in the 21st century. If you found this analysis of postmodernism in politics fascinating, make sure to subscribe. Join us for more thought-provoking content as we dive deeper into how these ideas continue to shape the world we live in.